All I know is a door into the dark. Outside, old axles and iron hoops rusting. Inside, the hammered anvil's short-pitched ring. The unpredictable fantail of sparks or hiss when a new shoe toughens in water. The anvil must be somewhere in the center, horned as a unicorn, at one end and square. Set there immovable, an altar where he expends himself in shape and music. Sometimes leather-aproned, hairs in his nose, he leans out on the jamb, recalls a clatter of hoofs where traffic is flashing in rows, then grunts and goes in with a slam and flick to beat real iron out, to work the bellows. So let's get into that space of receptivity. Welcome everybody who just joined. We're going to be talking about the forge of the heart, that door into the dark today. So with your hands face up on your lap and your feet flat on the floor as it's comfortable for you, the back straightened as best you can, and maybe just a millimeter more. And the same with the neck, straightening the neck and offering it just a millimeter more. So that that conduit between the heart and the head becomes one organ that carries the breath. And then we get into the work of softening everything around that conduit. From the top of the head, how the muscles of the jaw extend into our skull and around our faces. We don't know the total cost of that clenching. But for now, just letting it go. And feeling the eyes soften. Softening the jaw again. And then down the neck into the chest. And all throughout the shoulders, just letting all of it fall. Arcing out the chin just a little bit. And feeling your awareness at the center of your forehead. And then the belly relaxing. And the sits bones and the thighs, the calves, all the way back down to the bottoms of your feet. And then, as if it happens automatically, the room begins to expand. Even if there's sound interposing itself, that sound can be incorporated into the landscape. There can be made room for it. As the walls and the ceiling expand, And this room that we're sitting in, which includes rooms in Europe, rooms in California, rooms in Washington, D.C. and Massachusetts, rooms in Florida. All of these rooms can become included under one ceiling. As we all breathe in together, taking a breath, counting to 4. And pausing at the peak of it. And then breathing out to 5. Just doing that again. Taking a breath in to the count of 4. Pausing at the peak of it. Breathing out to 5. So much of the poem that we're going to talk about today is about the bellows, about the breath, and the ways that it creates a porousness to our experience, a flexibility, opening the drawbridge of the heart where we protect so much. And just as an experiment for the next half an hour, to let it be open to whatever happens or whatever feelings come and go. Feeling the airiness of this enormous room we've created together. We're coming up on 3 years. Breathing in to the count of 4. And breathing out to 5. Breathing in the suffering of others we would like to relieve. And letting it roil in the forge of the heart. And then breathing out to 5 so that it's fully transformed and expelled. Breathing in the call for peace in a world of hardships. Breathing out to 5, the fulfillment of that dream. Breathing in the need for healing in the body. Letting it roil in the forge of the heart. Breathing out the energies that propel that healing. All I know is a door into the dark. Outside, old axles and iron hoops rusting. Inside, the hammered anvil's short-pitched ring. the unpredictable fantail of sparks or hiss when a new shoe toughens in water. The anvil must be somewhere in the center, horned as a unicorn, at one end and square, set there immovable, an altar where he expends himself in shape and music. Sometimes, leather-aproned, hairs in his nose, he leans out on the jamb, recalls a clatter of hoofs where traffic is flashing in rows, then grunts and goes in with a slam and flick to beat real iron out, to work the bellows. This became the inspiration for the title of Seamus Heaney's second book, Door into the Dark. And there's a literal reading for it. It's based on a blacksmith from the 1940s named Barney Devlin, who lived in County Derry near Castle Dawson, where Seamus Heaney grew up. Barney Devlin was one of those big-voiced scullions that Heaney used to talk about, who were the old guard and represented the end of an old world in the midst of modernity. And certainly this poem is about a time of change. If you look at it closely, and when you hear it again, you'll notice what I'm talking about. It's very subtle, but it's placed beautifully in the poem. Things are ending for Barney Devlin. Axles for carriages that used to belong to the horses and buggies of the old world are obsolete out front of the smithy. And Barney is remembering the sounds of clopping hooves in the street where now there's flashing lights and traffic. So a world is ending in this poem, in which Seamus Heaney, who would be a boy in the early 40s walking to school, is observing this door into the dark where this mysterious alchemy is taking place. And of course, it's associated mostly with one of the great ars poeticas of the 20th century in English. It's not lost to me that Seamus Heaney, who was a formal poet of the late 20th century, he wrote in meter and rhyme, must have felt a little bit the same about his art. Instead of axles sitting out front of the garage, he had, metered lines and old Petrarchan rhyme schemes that he saw going out of style. But the poem seems to be an argument that these things that we are saying are obsolete are still good and still important and still to be praised. So it's a poem about writing poetry. Where the blacksmith is making shoes for horses, he makes sonnets in their shoe shape. And he's using the language of poetry to talk about it. He even talks about stepping out onto the jam and then the hiss of the new shoe that toughens with time. It's true of a poem too. We knock out a poem and we feel that hiss of its newness. And a poem, if it's worth its salt, really does toughen with time. It serves the world well by becoming more solid and more immovable. So the poem is like the horseshoe. And there's also a slight irregularity in this sonnet, like there would be for any shoe made by someone's hands and by someone's hammer. If you notice at the end of it, where we usually have an EFG rhyme in a Petrarchan sonnet, here the rhyme is very strange. It's EFG FEF. And why would he do that? A poet like Heaney would do it to wake us up. First, it would be to show the beauty of that irregularity, that variant which produces an emphasis of some sort. But it's also a way of making the poem unique, the way every horseshoe is unique. And here the hook is on that word flick. The flick to beat real iron out, to work the bellows. And we get that nice double rhyme with nose and rose and bellows. It's the echo of the hammer hitting the metal. It's where the meaning comes from in a formal poem like this, a very, very well-made formal poem. This conversation between the iron of form, which seems so unbendable, and the bellows work of the music, which creates that porousness that I was just talking about. He's also kind of saying something about the role of the poet, who is, if you notice, a kind of wolf figure. He's wearing this hide. He's got hair growing out of his nose. He's Hephaestus, working at the forge. He's a little hurt by the times in which he lives. And he's a figure who's setting aside reason for wildness. And Heaney seems to be arguing that that's the only way into the center of the forge, way down into the center where the heart is, where the anvil is. And of course, the anvil is a metaphor for the heart. And he calls it an altar, and he calls it a unicorn, which are all of these places of transcendence, these alchemizing places where, like Eliot says, the fire and the rose become one. So I chose this for our work in this context because there's a spiritual reading too, of course. How can we think about our practice as part of this forge work? There is real iron and there's bellows in our spiritual work. There's a focus on the body and there's a focus on the breath. There's a focus on what we can change and there's a focus on what we can't change. And we're constantly having a conversation between those dualities. In somatic practices, we're entering the door into the dark, which becomes the threshold into the body. And we're wearing that animal hide so that we can listen to that soft part of ourselves, that limbic part of ourselves that goes unheard most of the time. And we just ask ourselves, where am I hurting? So in the rain practice, we recognize and we enter through the door and we say that there's room for this and we look for its source in the body and then we nurture that soft animal. So it's a very familiar process to me, what he's describing here. What I most love about this poem, though, is the way that it seems to be talking about the dharma and the way that we can forge and bend our old reactions into responses that are more skillful. Here, the blacksmith is taking brute metal and in the fire of the heart, he's bending it into something useful. And our gut reactions, which come from old traumas and old wounds, can also be bent into useful responses. But what we need is that anvil, and what we need is the fire of the forge in order to effect that change. We can't do it by ourselves. And that's the dharma, or that's the beatitudes, or whatever practice you offer and lean on in order to expand the time between that gut reaction and a real skillful response that uses right speech or compassion or whatever it might call for. So let's go back in. I'm going to read this again and we'll do a little door into the dark practice to end today's meditation. The forge. All I know is a door into the dark. Outside, old axles and iron hoops rusting. Inside, the hammered anvil's short-pitched ring, the unpredictable fantail of sparks or hiss when a new shoe toughens in water. The anvil must be somewhere in the center, horned as a unicorn, at one end and square, set there immovable, an altar where he expends himself in shape and music. Sometimes leather aproned, hairs in his nose, He leans out on the jamb, recalls a clatter of hoofs where traffic is flashing in rows. Then grunts and goes in with a slam and flick to beat real iron out, to work the bellows. So let's get back into it. Sitting in that position of receptivity, straightening the back, and then just a millimeter more, and the neck. Feeling that huge awareness at the center of your forehead. Breathing in that bellows to the count of 4. Stepping into that door in the dark. There is a way in, the Buddha said. It's non-attachment. It's letting go of a desire for this or that outcome, or hatred and aversion. We step into the door in the dark and we realize that what we're calling our lives is really just characters being played out on a movie screen. We can step back and watch it all with loving impassivity. Then we get closer to the anvil at the center of the forge, the heart, the altar, the unicorn. This is where the work is done. In this practice, it's a lot easier to expand our response time. It's much harder when we're out in the world. But the heart is a place of devotion. It's a place of saying, even if I fail, this is my intention. This is where my life is going now. This is the work I've been called to do. And the last step is to be kind to ourselves and to know that this is a practice. Thich Nhat Hanh doesn't see any difference between our practice here in these rooms and writing. Here's what he says. Writing is a deep practice. Even before we begin writing, during whatever we're doing, gardening or sweeping the floor Our book or essay is being written deep in our consciousness. To write a book, we must write with our whole life, not just during the moments we're sitting at our desk. I just love that. Even before we begin writing, our book or essay is being written deep in our consciousness. To write a book, we must write with our whole life, not just during the moments we're sitting at our desk. Just taking 3 more breaths. To the count of 4. Pausing at that forge. Where the transmutation of our old reactions turn into skillful responses. And then breathing out to 5. All I know is a door into the dark. Outside, old axles and iron hoops rusting. Inside, the hammered anvil's short-pitched ring. The unpredictable fantail of sparks or hiss when a new shoe toughens in water. The anvil must be somewhere in the center, horned as a unicorn, at one end and square, set there immovable, an altar where he expends himself in shape and music. Sometimes Leather Apron hairs in his nose. He leans out on the jam, recalls a clatter of hoofs where traffic is flashing in rows, then grunts and goes in with a slam and flick to beat real iron out, to work the bellows. Thank you all.